Picture the scene. The lights are blinding. The anticipation in the arena is absolutely palpable. The hardwood floor is polished to a mirror finish, reflecting the faces of thousands of desperate, demanding Indiana Fever fans who have paid their hard-earned money to witness greatness. The expectations are astronomical. The pressure is suffocating. The Indiana Fever have just stepped onto the court against the Portland Fire. And for the first 2.5 minutes of this professional basketball game, the world is treated to an absolute vision of basketball utopia. It looks like sheer, unadulterated perfection. The offense is humming with a lethal, terrifying rhythm. The floor spacing is mathematically beautiful. The transition game is a blur of speed and precision. Caitlin Clark, the undisputed paradigm-shifting face of professional women's basketball, the billion-dollar golden goose of the entire WNBA, comes out of the locker room looking like an absolute apex predator. She is laser-focused. She is dissecting the defense with the cold, calculating precision of a neurosurgeon. She records 3 massive highlight reel assists in the first 3 minutes of the game. Down in the paint, Aaliyah Boston is eating. She is dominating the interior with absolute brute force, sealing off defenders, demanding the basketball, and finishing with authority. The Indiana Fever jump out to a fast, dominant, commanding 8-2 lead before you can even blink. Before the Portland Fire can even break a sweat, they are being run out of the gym. It is not a fluke. It is not a lucky streak. It is a highly talented, perfectly synchronized basketball team flawlessly executing a game plan and completely overwhelming their opponent. And then, a coaching decision happens. A decision that is so fundamentally mind-boggling, so completely devoid of basic basketball logic, and so incredibly destructive to the psychological fabric of this team, that it literally breaks the entire game wide open for the opponent and sends massive, terrifying shockwaves through the entire WNBA ecosystem. Welcome back to the channel. You already know exactly why you clicked on this video today. If you are absolutely sick and tired of the mainstream sports media networks desperately trying to protect the corporate WNBA coaching establishment, if you are exhausted by the cowardly access journalists who refuse to call out absolute, undeniable coaching malpractice when it happens right in front of our eyes, you have found your absolute sanctuary. We do not do polite, watered-down corporate PR spin here. We do not protect the billionaires hiding in their luxury executive suites. We give you the raw, unfiltered, high-octane truth about the tactical failures, the toxic locker room politics, and the absolute blood sport of professional basketball. Grab a seat, lock in, and turn your volume all the way up to the absolute maximum level. Because today, we are surgically dissecting the absolute disaster class that head coach Stephanie White just put on display in a humiliating, catastrophic, entirely avoidable 100-84 blowout loss to the Portland Fire. We are executing a microscopic breakdown of the viral bench altercation that is currently setting the internet on fire. We are analyzing the horrific, completely broken defensive scheme that Portland shredded to pieces. We are exposing the absolute stubborn refusal of a head coach to run the most lethal play in her own playbook. And we are going to look directly at the Indiana Fever front office and explain exactly why this specific game might be the final straw that forces Caitlin Clark out of Indianapolis forever. Let us start by walking through the exact, highly specific sequence that completely destroyed this basketball game. Because if you just watch the viral 10-second clip of Caitlin Clark looking frustrated on the bench, you are missing the entire context of why she had every single right to be absolutely unconditionally furious. As I mentioned, the Indiana Fever were up 8-2. The momentum was entirely on their side. The crowd was completely engaged. The Portland Fire were backpedaling, looking completely disorganized and overwhelmed by the sheer pace of the Fever's attack. Any logical, breathing, competent basketball coach on planet Earth looks at that momentum, looks at the scoreboard, feels the energy in the building, and says, "Let my best players cook." You ride the wave, you extend the lead, you put your foot directly on the opponent's throat early in the first quarter, and you do not let them breathe. Instead, at the exact 6-minute and 30-second mark of the first quarter, head coach Stephanie White looked down her bench, pointed her finger, and pulled both Caitlin Clark and Aaliyah Boston completely out of the basketball game. Pause the tape. Rewind it. Let that sink into your brain. There was no foul trouble. None. Caitlin Clark had 0 fouls. Aaliyah Boston had 0 fouls. There was no physical injury. None. Nobody was limping. Nobody was gasping for air. There was absolutely nothing wrong on the basketball court. The team was winning. The stars were dominating. So, what was the explanation that Stephanie White arrogantly, casually gave to the media during the post-game press conference when asked about this baffling decision? She looked at the reporters and claimed it was just her regular substitution pattern. Are you kidding me? Are you absolutely kidding me? You do not blindly stick to a predetermined, mathematically rigid spreadsheet when your franchise players are on a massive game-defining run. You do not manage a professional basketball game like you are punching a time clock at a factory. You manage the flow. You manage the momentum. And the result of that horrific, robotic, ego-driven coaching decision was instantaneous and absolutely devastating. The Portland Fire, realizing that the two greatest offensive threats on the floor had just been benched for absolutely no apparent reason, smelled blood in the water. They immediately ripped off a catastrophic, humiliating 13-2 run against the Indiana Fever's bench. By the time Caitlin Clark and Aaliyah Boston were finally allowed to check back into the basketball game, just 3 agonizing, deeply frustrating minutes later, at the 3-minute and 38-second mark, a commanding 6-point lead had instantly, magically vaporized into a 7-point deficit. A massive, momentum-shifting, game-altering 13-point swing happened entirely, while Caitlin Clark and Aaliyah Boston were forced to sit on the bench and helplessly watch their hard work be flushed down the drain. And that specific, undeniable context is exactly why the viral footage of Caitlin Clark on the sideline is the single most important piece of tape from this entire 2026 season. Let us break down the footage frame by agonizing frame. The footage is raw, it is explosive. It is the visual representation of a genius being suffocated by incompetence. Caitlin Clark is visibly heated. You can see the pure, unadulterated competitive rage radiating off her body. Words are aggressively exchanged with Stephanie White. The tension on that sideline is so thick you could cut it with a chainsaw. White completely loses her cool, violently slams her coaching clipboard onto the hardwood floor, and aggressively forces Clark to sit down in favor of Raven Johnson, all while the Portland Fire are actively, ruthlessly extending their lead on the floor. The lazy critics, the haters, and the Stephanie White media apologists are going to look at that clip and push a false narrative. They are going to say, "Oh, look at Caitlin Clark, she lost her composure. She is acting like a diva. She is being disrespectful to her coach. She needs to learn how to be a professional." That is an absolute calculated, malicious lie. Caitlin Clark wasn't reacting to a missed jump shot. She wasn't throwing a petty temper tantrum over a bad referee call. She was watching a highly winnable, highly competitive professional basketball game get completely, intentionally thrown in the trash by rigid, stubborn, grossly incompetent coaching. She was completely 100% right to be angry. Portland didn't go on a 13-2 run because they suddenly transformed into the 1996 Chicago Bulls. They went on a 13-2 run because Indiana's 2 best players were ordered to sit down on a predetermined schedule while the game was literally in the process of being won. When you possess a basketball IQ that borders on genius, and you are forced to watch a coach actively destroy your team's momentum because of a substitution spreadsheet, your absolute professional obligation is to be furious. But the offensive substitutions were only half of the nightmare. If the offensive management was terrible, the defensive scheme was pure, unadulterated, fireable coaching malpractice. Let us look at the horrific third quarter. 37 points. Portland dropped 37 points on the Indiana Fever in one single, catastrophic 12-minute quarter. They finished the game shooting nearly 50% from the field and an absolutely scorching 40% from behind the three-point line. And how did they do it? Did the Portland Fire just happen to have a lucky, unexplainable shooting night? Absolutely not. They did it by completely, surgically, and ruthlessly exploiting Stephanie White's fundamentally broken defensive switching scheme. When you run a defensive system where you tell your players to switch every single screen, regardless of the personnel involved, and your players are not physically matched up to handle those switches, the opposing offense already knows exactly where the gaps are before the play even starts. Portland ran the exact same action over and over and over again. And Stephanie White's defense kept biting. Look at Portland's Megan Gustafson. She finished the night with 22 points. She shot a perfect, flawless 8 for 8 from the field. Let me repeat that. 8 for 8. In professional basketball, against elite athletes, you do not shoot 8 for 8 from the field just because you are in the zone. You shoot 8 for 8 because the opposing defense is literally handing you wide open, completely uncontested looks directly at the rim. Indiana's defensive assignments were so completely broken, their communication was so non-existent, and their weak-side rotations were so agonizingly slow, that Portland's guards simply drove the lane, drew the completely predictable switch, and dumped the ball off to their bigs for absolute practice gym layups all night long. Gustafson didn't even have to work for her points. She didn't have to put the ball on the floor. She didn't have to create her own shot. She just stood there and caught the basketball in the perfect spots because Stephanie White's defensive scheme literally escorted her to the basket. This completely chaotic, unorganized defensive environment is exactly why Caitlin Clark ended up in severe foul trouble. She picked up her fourth foul early in the third quarter. She came back in and immediately picked up her fifth foul shortly after. Why? Because she lacks defensive effort? No. Because the scheme constantly put her in highly vulnerable, one-on-one isolation mismatches against bigger players without any clean help coverage behind her. She was forced to overcompensate for a broken system. Because of that completely avoidable foul trouble, Clark spent massive critical chunks of the second half stuck on the bench, while the Portland lead disgustingly ballooned to 25 points. She only played 21 minutes in the entire game. You cannot win a basketball game when your billion-dollar engine is forced to sit in the garage for half the night. And what makes this defensive collapse even harder to accept? There is absolutely zero evidence from the game footage, or the advanced box score, that Stephanie White made any meaningful tactical adjustments when Portland started going to work in the second half. The confusion between the switching zone and the trapping defense that every single analyst with functioning eyes flagged in the first half was still glaringly present in the third quarter. Portland navigated it perfectly. Indiana looked like they had literally never practiced it a day in their lives. And while all of this defensive chaos was happening, while Portland was casually building a 37-point quarter, look at what the Indiana Fever roster was actually doing on the offensive end of the floor. Look closely at the box score. This data should genuinely bother every single Fever fan who pays hard-earned money for a ticket, a jersey, or a television subscription. Aaliyah Boston dropped 18 points. Kelsey Mitchell put up 17 points. Sophie Cunningham added 15 points. And Timpson came off the bench and provided a highly efficient 11 points. That is 61 points combined from just 4 players in a game that the Indiana Fever ultimately lost by 16. And let me be very clear. These were not garbage time numbers. These were not meaningless stats padded in the final 3 minutes of the fourth quarter when Portland had already locked up the victory. This was real, tangible, highly efficient production from a core group of players who can genuinely, actually score the basketball. So, let us do the basic mathematics. When 4 of your players score in double figures, providing 61 points of offense, and your franchise point guard still manages to distribute 6 assists against just 1 single turnover in only 21 minutes of fragmented, heavily managed playing time, and you still lose the game by 16 points, you absolutely do not have a talent problem. You have a massive, undeniable, catastrophic coaching problem. The talent is on the floor. The roster is capable. The coaching staff is literally standing in their way. Which brings us to the absolute final nail in the coffin of this game tape. The single most infuriating, ego-driven coaching decision of the entire night. The Caitlin Clark and Aaliyah Boston pick and roll. It is the most dangerous, unguardable, devastating offensive weapon the Indiana Fever possess. It forces defenses to make impossible choices. It creates massive gravitational pull. If you double Clark, Boston rolls to the rim for an easy layup. If you stay on Boston, Clark steps back for a lethal 30-foot three-pointer. It is the exact play that should be the foundational, undeniable bedrock of their entire offensive system. And according to multiple analysts who meticulously broke down the game film, Stephanie White reportedly abandoned that play entirely after Caitlin Clark committed exactly 1 turnover early in the game. 1 turnover. Instead of running the specific high-percentage pick-and-roll actions that Aaliyah Boston's 18-point night proved were actually working, the Indiana Fever offense was forced to devolve into stagnant, predictable, one-on-one isolation basketball. That is the absolute worst possible way to utilize a generational playmaker like Caitlin Clark. It completely neutralizes her court vision. It completely eliminates her passing angles. And it is one of the primary, undeniable reasons her shooting efficiency completely cratered in this game. Clark logged 3 assists in the first 3 minutes of the game when she was actually allowed to operate freely, push the pace, and run the floor in transition. But when Stephanie White pulled her, completely destroyed her rhythm, and then explicitly stopped running offensive sets designed to maximize her passing vision, Clark was forced to spend long, agonizing stretches on the floor, simply standing in the corner as a decoy, rather than operating as the lethal threat she is. She finished the night with a season-low 6 points on 1 for 7 shooting. The immediate, lazy instinct of the mainstream media is to call it an off night. They will write articles about how Clark is hitting the rookie wall. That narrative falls apart the absolute second you look at the tactical reality of what actually happened. 6 points is not a sign that Caitlin Clark forgot how to play basketball. 6 points is exactly what happens when your head coach scraps the absolute best play in the playbook because of one single meaningless turnover. 6 points is what happens when your coach intentionally sits you down during a massive momentum run because of a spreadsheet. 6 points is what happens when you are managed entirely out of your own rhythm by a system that despises your greatness. And when Caitlin Clark stepped up to the podium for the post-game press conference, she did exactly what a true championship-caliber leader is supposed to do. She didn't blame the referees, even though the foul trouble was highly questionable. She didn't deflect blame onto her teammates. She pointed straight at herself. She honestly assessed the team's failures. She pointed to anticipation, activity, and awareness as the areas where the Fever fell short. She admitted that when Indiana tried to double-team, they were incredibly slow in their rotations. She praised Portland for exploiting the switches, and she publicly stated that she personally needed to do a better job staying straight up on ISO defense and moving her feet. That is real, genuine, mature accountability. But what she was describing is exactly what Stephanie White's horrific defensive scheme kept putting her in. Isolation situations without help, and the contrast between Caitlin Clark taking absolute ownership of the game and Stephanie White pointing fingers at process and player execution during her own press conference made the head coach look infinitely worse. It is a genuinely hard sell to sit at a podium and blame player execution when Aaliyah Boston scores 18, Kelsey Mitchell scores 17, Sophie Cunningham scores 15, and you still get blown out of your own building because your defensive scheme is a complete and total joke. The situation in Indianapolis has officially reached a critical, toxic boiling point. The phrase coaching malpractice isn't just floating around social media comment sections anymore. It is the loudest, most undeniable conversation in the entire WNBA ecosystem. Some fans have actually gotten to the dark, desperate point where they would rather see the Indiana Fever lose games if Caitlin Clark puts up big individual numbers, simply because they believe a humiliating losing streak is the absolute only thing that will force the front office's hand to fire the coach. When your own fan base is actively, passionately rooting for losses just to trigger a coaching change, the situation isn't just a rough patch. It is a full-blown organizational crisis. It is a massive blinking red emergency light. The front office question, now sitting directly in front of General Manager Amber Cox and President of Basketball Operations Kelly Krauskopf, is very real, and it is very, very expensive. Keeping Stephanie White means stubbornly preserving the organizational structure tied to Indiana's past. It means protecting a head coach simply because you hired her. But every single analyst, fan, and basketball mind can clearly see that this structure is actively, maliciously working against Caitlin Clark's development and artificially capping the team's ultimate ceiling. Some sports business analysts have gone as far as warning the franchise that if the Fever keep losing at this humiliating rate, and if Clark continues to be mismanaged and verbally abused on the sidelines, her trade value drops, her frustration peaks, and Indiana could eventually face the apocalyptic nightmare of a generational player refusing to sign an extension and demanding a trade out of the city. And trust me, there are expansion teams like the Toronto franchise and the Golden State Valkyries who are watching this Indiana Fever civil war with absolute glee. They are salivating at the prospect of rescuing Caitlin Clark from this toxic environment. They would gladly fire their entire staffs and hand her the keys to the city. Caitlin Clark's MVP trajectory is 100% legitimate. Aaliyah Boston, Kelsey Mitchell, Sophie Cunningham, and the rest of this core group possess the talent to go on a deep championship playoff run. But they absolutely cannot do it with a coaching system that actively works against them. The Indiana Fever front office now has a very specific, very public, very embarrassing 100-84 loss sitting directly on their mahogany desks as undeniable evidence. Think about what Indiana actually put up against a Portland team that played a near-perfect game on the second night of a grueling back-to-back. 4 players in double figures, a point guard averaging over 22 points and 8 assists coming into the game. And the Fever still couldn't get a win because the coaching decisions kept getting directly in the way of the elite talent. Portland's record now sits above Indiana's. An expansion team is currently outperforming the most hyped, most talented, most expensive roster in the league. That is exactly where things stand right now. And the front office absolutely cannot look away from the blazing fire anymore. This is the WNBA. This is professional basketball. The era of the Indiana Fever trying to humble their superstar is officially over. We are going to be tracking this massive front office crisis every single step of the way. If you want the highly analytical, completely fearless, unvarnished truth about the deep-rooted business and politics of the WNBA that the mainstream networks are absolutely terrified to broadcast, you know exactly what to do. Smash that subscribe button right now. Destroy the notification bell so you never miss a deep dive documentary breakdown. And I absolutely need to hear your most explosive, unfiltered take in the comments section below. Is it officially time for the Indiana Fever to fire Stephanie White? Was Caitlin Clark completely justified in her sideline eruption and the clipboard incident? And how much longer can Kelly Krauskopf ignore the massive organized fan boycott before she is forced to clean house? I want every single honest basketball opinion in that comment section right now. The ticking clock in Indianapolis has officially started, and we are documenting every single move made. Keep your eyes on the court. We will see you in the next video.